It's finally that time again. So what's going on here is that I'm using an online random movie generator and reviewing whatever comes up, for 2 movies per video. I've only tried that once before and didn't get anything as wild as I'd hoped. So I decided to turn my attention solely to the home of weird, often bad stuff, TUBI. Wait, is that really the logo they're going with now? Yep, I'm limiting my search to that service, in the hopes that this would lead me to something more fun to talk about. I get to complain about more dumb B movies. Yeah, there aren't really as many of that kind of things here, but I did still get a far more interesting and obscure selection than last time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't want to kill the illusion that I'm about to pick the movie right now. Anyway, I wonder what my first one will be, because in the continuity of this video I clearly do not know. And it's Made in America. I have no idea what that is. Perfect. Now to... Wait, these movies look a lot different from what the poster on the movie generator looks like. Yep, it's not the same movie. There was some kind of mistake here. I don't know if it confused it with the documentary on TUBI or if TUBI used to have it but doesn't anymore. But either way, I'm only seeing the Made in America that the generator chose, and since I can't do that, I guess I'll just have to roll again. And now for our real first movie, 2009's Defendor. Another one that I've never heard of. The perfect choice yet again. Defendor is from Canadian writer and director Peter Stebbings. It is an independent, low-budget wannabe superhero movie on TUBI. And it's actually not bad. It's a little more like Matthew Vaughn's Kick-Ass or James Gunn's Super than whatever Marvel and DC are putting out. A dark R-rated comedy about what would realistically happen if a normal person tried to be a superhero and didn't get killed immediately. Except it actually came out before both of those movies. IMDB lists it as 2009, the year right before them both. This was the year when it had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival. Although according to Wikipedia, its official theatrical release was in 2010, a few months before Kick-Ass. In fact, that date was less than a month away from Kick-Ass's South by Southwest premiere. Super would also only at a festival in 2010 but get its actual release in 2011. That was a wild 3 years for this tiny subgenre. More impressive, how all of these movies had some kind of release in the same year. Peter Stebbings was primarily an actor, and this was both his directorial debut and the first script he actually sold. He wrote it in 2005 and said the idea came to him all at once. It received some attention from actors who were interested, but received less enthusiasm from Hollywood studios who were not sold on it because it didn't fit into any one particular genre. So it must be really good then. Okay, but it's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, so I'm not being too contrarian with this positive review. But his luck turned around once the script found its way to independent company Darius Films. Bigwig Nicholas Tabarrok said that he was hooked from the very first read and gave it the green light, and agreed to fly him from Toronto to LA to meet with the actors, including, among other big ones I'll get to later, Elliot Page, then Ellen Page. But he dropped out. A few sources I looked at don't say what role he was supposed to be, but I think it's most likely that he was supposed to be the crack-addicted prostitute that ended up being played by Thor and Two Broke Girls star Kat Dennings. However, something I saw during the credits kind of made me doubt that a little. See, Kat Dennings' character was actually named Kat, which I knew before seeing the credits, but anyway, there was also a psychologist who examines the titular character played by another big actress, a pre-Killing Eve but still Grey's Anatomy era Sandra Oh, and in the credits I found that her character's first name was Ellen. However, I'm still definitely leaning more towards Kat Dennings' character because that's the one who I can most see as Elliot Page. Especially since this was shortly after Juno where he plays the teenager, so he'd probably be too young to be convincing as someone who's put in charge of examining someone like Defendor. That main title role was played by Woody Harrelson, by the way, whose character was not named Woody, so that probably helps my case. Either way, Page later co-starred in Super. The budget was $4 million Canadian. One quarter of that came from the Film Fund Telefilm Canada. But even with that loan, he still struggled to get the money to complete it, and production ended up being delayed for some time until it was finally filmed in January of 2009. To help with Dennings' characters, the producers consulted with Toronto social service workers and Wendy Babcock, an activist for the legalization of prostitution. They wanted to get a more realistic depiction of drug use and sex work. The movie premiered at TIFF in 2009. The rights to distribution in Canada were already sold to Alliance Films as part of their financing deals. And after the premiere, Sony Pictures Worldwide Acquisitions Group bought the rights to distribution in the United States and most of Asia, Europe, and South America. Until one day they just decided, let's not release it theatrically in America for some reason. When that happened, Darius Films self-released it. Anyway, on to the actual movie. Woody Harrelson plays the title character, a wannabe superhero, or a mentally ill man who has deluded himself into thinking he's a superhero. He has spent an untold amount of his life trying to take down the evil Captain Industry, who he blames for his mother leaving him as a kid. and later dying of a drug overdose. Yeah, the story of what's going on there comes later in the movie. Anyway, he meets up with a crack-addicted prostitute who basically tells him that she knows about this probably imaginary figure and turns him against the gang who wronged her. And so now we have a movie. Woody Harrelson is the lifeblood of this movie. He plays this character very well, with a sort of innocence to contrast with the gritty setting and plot. Kat Dennings also gives a great performance, creating a character who, despite her drug use and sex work, doesn't turn into an object to pity or look down on. The movie is a comedy drama. Yes, it's very reminiscent of Kick-Ass and Super, the later of which was the first thing that TUBI recommended for me once the credits started to roll on this movie, but it's its own thing entirely. I guess a good way to describe it is if Kick-Ass happened in the gritty world of Taxi Driver. It's darkly comical, but it isn't afraid to take place in a world that's just dark. It's a lot more subtle than those other movies. This isn't the twisted mind of Matthew Vaughn or the horribly beautiful mind of James Gunn. This is the perfectly normal mind of Peter Stebbings, and he's not interested in being over the top. The action is more subdued and the humor is also kind of subdued. Remember when I said this was R-rated? Well, not in the way that those other movies are. Those were very gory, this one not so much. In fact, if you look at the rating, you'll see that the emphasis is more on drug use and language throughout, despite the fact that all the drugs are portrayed as terrible things that killed Defendor's mother and is dragging Kat down. I really don't know how any parent would think that this would negatively affect children old enough to watch PG-13 movies.
This is your brain. This is This is your brain on. Any questions?
To be fair, I don't really remember any real R-rated violence either, which is kind of the point here. Not over the top or violent like those other two. What we get instead is a semi-grounded story of what would probably happen if somebody was to actually do this. A movie that focuses on the darker side of the story and characters, with an ending that's more bittersweet than flat-out happy. The main issue I've seen critics complain about is that the darker, more dramatic parts don't mesh as well with the more comedic moments. For that, I have to disagree. I didn't really notice any drastic shift in tone. Once again, the humor is more restrained, which probably helped with the transition to the drama. Really, the closest I have to a complaint is that it just isn't as good as those similar movies I've mentioned. Yes, maybe it's just not as fun because it's not as over the top, but at the same time, I haven't seen Kick-Ass in a long time, but I'm pretty sure it still had better writing. The humor here is maybe okay for some light chuckles, but I don't remember any real laugh-out-loud moments. There's probably a reason Stebbings isn't as much of a recognizable name in the film world as those other two are now. But all in all, this movie probably deserved better than this. To be rejected so often, struggle to get funding, and ultimately end up forgotten. An indie passion project that managed to snag a great Woody Harrelson performance. It's a little more dark than it is funny, yet it's still all strangely satisfying. How is this the superhero movie that Sony was skeptical of?
Is really complex.
Winged freak terrorizes. Wait till they get a load of me.
He's the idol of every woman.
Who are you?
Bond. James Bond.
The envy of every man. The nemesis of the treacherous Mr. Goldfinger.
Okay, now it's time for A Most Wanted Man from 2014. Actually sounds familiar. I probably heard of it when it was playing and then forgot about it, but had that vague memory deep in my mind. I had a feeling it may have been nominated for some Oscars, but it turns out it wasn't. Or any Golden Globes either. But it was still mostly acclaimed by critics, and it has one big thing to be remembered by. It was one of the last movies to star Philip Seymour Hoffman before his death. But unfortunately, even that doesn't help to make this as interesting as our first movie. Either to watch or to talk about. No, please don't go. Anyway, it was from director Anton Corbijn and written by Andrew Bovell, based on the book by famed spy novel author John le Carré, with additional writing by his son Stephen Cornwell. The book was inspired by Murat Kurnaz, a Muslim Turkish citizen and legal resident of Germany who was arrested in Pakistan and held at Guantanamo Bay for 5 years. So, le Carré wrote a book about a German government agent trying to take down a rich man suspected of funneling money to Al-Qaeda, as well as the web of people involved with him, including a Chechnyan immigrant similar to the real-life Kurnaz. Set in Hamburg, where le Carré worked as both a consul and an agent in the 50s and 60s. And then, of course, it was made into a movie, which had a cast of A-listers including Rachel McAdams, Willem Dafoe, Robin Wright, and, of course, Philip Seymour Hoffman. It was also the English-language debut of Nina Haas, and the first producing credits for Simon and Stephen Cornwell, the two sons of John le Carré. This also makes it their first film collaboration with their father, who, in addition to writing the source material, is also listed as an executive producer. They would collaborate on two other ones before le Carré's death in 2020, The Night Manager and Our Kind of Traitor, both released in 2016. And since Stephen is credited with additional writing on The Most Wanted Man script, it's also the first and possibly only time they've shared writing credits. In addition to all that, it was the first major introduction to le Carré's work for many of the cast and crew, including director Anton Corbijn and Philip Seymour Hoffman, the latter of whom would express his admiration for the source material. He also worked with the screenwriter to develop his performance of the lead character, who he would develop great sympathy for. The movie premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and only a week later, Hoffman tragically passed away from mixed drug intoxication. This was his last completed role, although after that he had incomplete parts in The Hunger Games Mockingjay Parts 1 and 2. And it got a posthumous theatrical run that summer, in limited release before expanding a few weeks later. As for the movie itself, there isn't really much to say about it. It's a really slow-paced spy drama that takes place in a version of Germany where everyone speaks perfect English because it's an American and British movie. That last part's not a complaint. But the high point is probably Hoffman's performance. That is a big recurring theme among the reviews for this, and it probably isn't the sympathy vote. He plays a pretty good world-weary character. And that was probably a big part of this movie getting acclaimed by critics. It appears to be a little more divisive among more general audiences, and I hate to say this, but I think I might be with them here. Most of the time in this situation I agree with critics who liked it, for like A24 horror stuff or something, although not so much when the main complaints are that it's slow and boring. And this is indeed slow and boring. It's a spy thriller, except it's not very thrilling. No, I wasn't expecting a James Bond or a Jason Bourne situation where it would be wall-to-wall action. This is mostly just people in suits talking about money laundering or something, and I'm okay with that. It's just that the plot moves so damn slowly. Add to that, characters who are, while well acted and all that, aren't exactly deep enough for me to care about. The movie doesn't really give me any reason to care about anything that happens here. There aren't even any real stakes. Basically, if the bad guy wins, Al-Qaeda doesn't lose one funder. During the ad breaks, I've read some of the Letterboxd reviews, and some of them said that the ending makes up for a lot of it. And I know that feeling. There have been a few times where a great ending redeemed a slow movie for me. But when it came along, I just didn't feel like it did a lot. I mean, it was okay, I guess, a little bit of dark ending, but really it wasn't shocking or moving enough to really stand out from the rest of it. Earlier I said that Defendor probably didn't deserve to be as forgotten as it was. This one, from what I can tell, is remembered mostly for being among Philip Seymour Hoffman's last, and that sounds about right. It isn't terrible or anything, but Hoffman is really the only noteworthy thing here and would still be noteworthy even if this wasn't his last movie. I don't really have much else to say about this. Such is the random movie generator. When you choose TUBI, there's a good chance you'll get like some killer butterfly movie from the 70s exploitation era or something. Other times you get something like this. First movie I got was unique and obscure enough to be close enough to the former, but this one just isn't even that much of an interesting choice. Pretty underwhelming way to end this video after that. But either way, it's not great, but I guess recommended for fans of Philip Seymour Hoffman or John le Carré.